CTV News at 5 with Hudson Mack.
Sandwich police are on a manhunt after they say a group of men brutally attacked a man with a blunt object near Tillicum Mall and left their victim for dead in a pool of blood. Police say a man and his friend were walking through Hampton Park at about 11 o'clock last Wednesday night. They say 4 men started following them. Police say one of the victims was hit in the side of the head with something that may have been a bat. The 52-year-old victim was bleeding profusely from the head. His friend wrapped his T-shirt around his head to try to slow the bleeding. Officers called in the K-9 unit, but they couldn't track the attackers down.
Apparently, given that portion of the park where it occurred and the time of night, it was very dark. So unfortunately, all we have to go on are 4 young males. And one witness describes them as being as young as 14 or 15 years of age. The second describes them as being sort of late teen, early 20-somethings. And the 4 of them were last seen heading towards, roughly towards the Native Friendship Center at the back of Hampton Park there on Regina Avenue.
Was rushed to Victoria General Hospital by ambulance, suffering a 3-inch gash on his head. Police say he needed multiple staples to close the wound, and he's suffering from a concussion. If you have any information about the incident, you're asked to call Sandwich Police or Crime Stoppers. And police remind you to wear a helmet if you're on a bike tonight after a cyclist was thrown over his handlebars and landed head first on the blacktop. Paramedics swarmed the cyclist, lifted him onto a stretcher, and then loaded him into an ambulance. Police say the rider had run into the back of a truck at Douglas Street and Caledonia Avenue. Happened just after 10 this morning, and they say the man was not wearing a helmet.
The truck was coming southbound on Douglas Street, was proceeding to do a left-hand turn onto Caledonia, and the cyclist was going straight through for a north direction. At some point, the cyclist contacted the back end of the truck, was flung over his handlebars, and made contact with the roadway.
The cyclist was taken to the hospital suffering head injuries and significant road rash as well. A machine that was out to clean up the streets of downtown Victoria ended up making a mess of things instead when its oil pump blew, spewing oil everywhere. The crippled street sweeper left a trail of slick black oil for several blocks downtown, and that wasn't the only problem. There was a massive dust cloud that formed near Pandora and Douglas after city crews dumped absorbent on the spill to try to soak it up.
It's extremely rare for one of our own street cleaning machines to have an incident like this, but this is something that can happen to any piece of equipment traveling through the city. And ironically, our public work crews and the street sweeper itself are usually the first line of response when responding to any piece of equipment or truck traveling through the city that does have the same issue.
The city has monitored the spill and the cleanup. It says there was no environmental damage. Any remnants should be cleaned up by tomorrow morning. Well, if you're planning to head off Vancouver Island or come to the island over the next few days, BC Ferries says plan ahead. You should make reservations. The ferry fleet is down a ship, and that could mean delays. BC Ferries docked the Spirit of British Columbia today, temporarily removing it from service on the main route from Tsawwassen to Swartz Bay to repair a damaged propeller. A smaller vessel, the Queen of New Westminster, has been brought in to pick up the slack, but there are some sailings that will be cancelled. Those include the 3 and 7 o'clock sailings from the mainland and the 5 and 9 p.m. from Swartz Bay. Currently, though, there are no sailing waits to report. The Spirit of British Columbia is scheduled to return to service on the 7 a.m. sailing from Tsawwassen tomorrow. Well, there's a new report out tonight that backs BC's claim that it will see far fewer economic benefits from the proposed Enbridge Pipeline than Alberta would, or even Ontario. The Canadian Energy Research Institute in Calgary says BC would get $1 billion in tax revenue over 25 years. Alberta would get $73 billion from the line. Ontario would get $4 billion under the terms of energy revenue sharing. Premier Christy Clark says she's against the pipeline if BC doesn't get more say in how those profits are divided and more of the profits themselves. BC's Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says the Northern Gateway project's the most significant issue facing his people in a generation. Former Victoria MP and Environment Minister David Anderson has also spoken out against the pipeline, saying of any company, Enbridge is the wrong one to run this line, if only for its poor environmental record. Well, as it celebrates its past, the City of Victoria is also looking to the future, to the year 2041, hoping the landscape will look drastically different. The city says more development and better transportation will create a more attractive, more walkable, and economically vibrant capital. The city says its new official community plan is tailored to your needs and was created based on the input of more than 6,000 people across the capital region. The plan has now been formally adopted as a bylaw. The goal is to preserve the community's character while developing living space and businesses and addressing the growing needs of transportation.
Part of what the plan does is it lays out where heightened density goes, so along the Douglas Street corridor spine, how we protect our harbor, that we sort of have an amphitheater type of building where it's low at the water and works its way back up. It talks about where our transportation is going to be. It talks about where our bike lanes and our greenways are going to be within communities and neighborhoods. So really it sets up the roadmap, and for those that follow it, things happen quickly.
And in terms of growth, the city predicts that over the next 30 years, Victoria will have 20,000 more people and about 10,000 new jobs created. The city's plan was last updated in 1955. Back in this province, a stubborn wildfire burning on the west shore of Okanagan Lake in the community of Wilson's Landing is now nearly contained. A crew of 80 has tamed the flames, which charred 27 hectares of land, reaching within about a kilometre of homes just north of West Kelowna. Homeowners are relieved after an evacuation alert was issued when the fire jumped a guard overnight. The forestry department says the fire is now about 75% contained. The road to West Kelowna, between West Kelowna to Vernon, has now been reopened to single-lane traffic. Now the story of a couple of baby bears settling into their new home after their mother was struck and killed by a vehicle along Highway 19 near Horn Lake. Conservation officers found the 7-month-old cubs up a tree not far from their mother's body, lying dead at the side of the highway. The young male cubs are under the care of the North Island Wildlife Recovery Association. It already had one single cub, which means this duo will become a trio.
It's sad that they lost their mother, but it's really good for the single bear that we already had. It's really hard to raise them naturally as a solo cub, so these two were introduced immediately once they were out of their sedative, and the three of them will become buddies and teach each other bear things.
The Recovery Association says it'll raise the twins until they're big enough to leave. That probably won't happen until next summer, so that they don't get used to people. The cubs will be kept away from the public, but they can be seen on monitors through closed-circuit TV. Also tonight, an update on those mysterious snapping turtles we told you about that popped up earlier this month in Port Alberni and in Metchosin. They could soon be heading east. No one knows exactly how the invasive species arrived on Vancouver Island, but the plans for their departure are in the works. The North Island Wildlife Recovery Association hopes to ship these turtles to the Toronto Zoo, but the paperwork to make them make that trip is proving to be a challenge.
It is, yeah, to get the permits to ship them cross-border and find an airline that will do it and have them commit to taking them. So it could be a long process, but we're hoping that will come through. It would be a great place for them to be.
Once they are shipped east, the turtles could become permanent members of the zoo community in Toronto, or they could be released eventually back into the wild. The species is native to eastern Canada, but could have a disaster effect on the West Coast ecosystem if they are allowed to stay here. RCMP and Powell River took to the sky for a dramatic rescue when an injured woman became trapped on an ice face. Police and members of Powell River's volunteer search and rescue group responded to a call near Center Lake. A Texas-based company contacted them last night saying one of their customers' emergency beacons had been activated. Shortly after that, 2 hikers were found. Rescuers learned one had fallen and suffered a head injury. Because of the rough terrain, the helicopter pilot couldn't land, so the pilot hovered overhead over the rocks nearby, while an RCMP officer and a search and rescue technician hoisted the injured woman and her hiking partner to safety. Catalyst Paper is shutting down its mill in Snowflake, Arizona, due to slumping demand for its product and the company's ongoing financial struggles. The operations in Arizona will cease at the end of September. The mill will be dismantled and the property will be sold. Catalyst recently won approval for a financial restructuring to allow it to avert bankruptcy. The company employs about 1,700 people in Port Alberni, Crofton, and Powell River. Catalyst says the Arizona closure will not have an effect on its other operations, including those in BC. RCMP and Nanaimo are targeting drunk drivers in a summer campaign. It got underway on the 13th of this month, and already 26 people have been issued roadside prohibitions for blood alcohol levels over the legal limit.
It's very concerning to us that these people, after all the media attention, everything that's been said and done, they still decide to drink and then get behind the wheel and drive. It's very concerning to us. There's a lot of drinking and driving going on out there, and especially in the evening hours, you have to be very cautious, not only of your own driving, but of the driving of people around you who may be intoxicated.
Officers taking part in the impaired driving campaign are also keeping an eye out for folks who are still using cell phones, texting while they drive, and novice drivers who are not following the limited conditions of their license.